don't think I can take how ugly this is any longer. So I'm going to do a little more to it. All right. So first of all, in this form, if we put our inputs inside something with a class of input group, that's something that Foundation has a style for. So we could wrap both the button and the form in that. Let's do it. So right inside the form, I'm going to make a div with a class of input-group. And all of this is going to be inside of that. Now that pretty much eliminates the need for this inner 9 and 3. So get rid of that div. Get rid of this div. Well, actually leave that div around the button. But the input is just going to be right inside that input group. But what we can do with the submit button, instead of small 3 columns, if we give this a class of input group button, there's a CSS rule in Foundation for divs with the class of input group button that are inside a div of input group and that have buttons inside them. Let's see what that does. Okay, they're a little misaligned here. It could be because of something else we did. I think I'd like that to be a green button. I think we saw yesterday when we looked at the Foundation examples. Success button. So how about success button expanded? I wonder if we put some custom CSS in here that's messing things up. That doesn't look right. So why wouldn't those be lining up? Well, just like we have to wrap this button in an input group button in order for it to get the right styles inside an input group, the input itself needs to have a class now of input group field, input-group-field. Yeah, now they get smashed together so that they're almost like one thing. I like that. Oops. Let's look here. There's a form here. This is kind of what we're going for here. You see how this particular input, the button and the input kind of look like one. If we inspect that, we see input group. The input has a class of input group field. Then we have this input group label. Where's the button? Oh, that is the button. Yeah, so that's a label as opposed to a button. But we see they're all part of an input group, and that's what makes them that way. Cool. Now for our list, which right now is still kind of hideous. Well, for one thing, they got bullets, and that looks silly with that border around it. It's a very common thing to just turn off the list style on a list, and predictably enough, there's something for that built into Foundation. No dash bullet will do it. Let's do that and refresh. All right, we got rid of those silly bullets. We got rid of the indentation. That's a little better. Now we're about to have a lot more buttons here. We already put a button group on this. What's the next one we want to do? Promote. Let's add that second button. Button, we'll give it a class of, once again, we'll want to be able to identify all of these buttons. So we will call it promote, just like we gave a class of remove on the one above. Why a class instead of an ID? Because there are going to be many of them on the page, right? Every single LI is going to have another copy of each of these buttons. So they're not unique. Let's see, what are our button styles? Yeah, there's more than just these four. There's one called warning that's actually kind of the color I think I want. And we need that button class on there, a button with a class of button, to get Foundation's default button styling. Okay, say promote. Cool. How's this looking by now? A little better. The thing's still a little comically tall right now. But it's better. So why is it like this? Let's inspect this button group here. No, look at this. When I hover over it, what's that orange there underneath it? Oops. Down here we can see all the styles that are applied to the element that we've selected. It'll be off to the right if you have your dev tools on the right. And among other things, we can see the box model here. Looks like orange is margin. Looks like it has 16 pixels of margin on the bottom. If we want to know which rule that's coming from, here are the list of all the rules that are applied to this element. Button group, which is part of Foundation, has a bottom margin of 1 rem. We don't want that in ours. So we could try to override that rule for button group, but that's a little too broad. So we really just want it for our button group, which we've already given a class of actions to identify it. So actions in addition to floating right, we'll give it a margin bottom of 0. Don't forget your semicolon. Refresh. It's still taking up that much space, but that margin is gone. It's no longer at fault. So what else in there could be making it so dang big? Student name. What about the student thing itself? It's that tall. Looks like we have a height of 4 rem in here. Get rid of that. And it shrinks, but other bad things happen. So let's see about that. Let's take out that height for right now. So you may remember we floated this actions thing to the right. We said float right on it. Here's actions. Float right. Now floats are, again, a kind of complicated thing. But they'll just kind of float into each other and not... the thing underneath it will not necessarily go underneath it. Since it's floating over here, it might just sort of slam into it. It won't leave room for it. Unless you add a rule to the thing underneath it that says clear : both. That is such a common thing to do that there is a class with that rule already applied in Foundation. If we just give each LI one more class of clear fix, and refresh, that takes care of that. So having done that, if we look again at the LI itself, get rid of the height. Now the height goes back down. Okay, so that height of 4 rem should go. So I added a clear fix class to the LI itself. App CSS, I have this height of 4 rem. No more. Don't like it. Change my mind. But I feel like we could use a little padding inside this thing. This is hugging the left. It looks a little funny. So notice this little picture of our box model here. Margin, border, padding, the actual element. So padding is inside the border. Margin is outside the border. So that's one of the differences between the two. We want it to be inside the border because the problem is that the name is just too darn close to the border. So let's put some padding as opposed to margin. I'm going to say 0.75 rim. And rim is just kind of our base unit. It happens to be 16 pixels. But the point is, as long as we use 0.7, as long as we use rims for everything, we can keep track of kind of how relative it is. Now there's a padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left. But there's also this single padding shortcut, in which case you pass them in that order: top, right, bottom, left. And if you put just two things, then the first thing will be applied to top and bottom, and the second thing will be applied to left and right. Let's do that. I want a little more padding on the left and right than on the top and bottom. So I'm going to say 0.75 on top and bottom, 1.25 on left and right. Refresh. That's a little better. This thing isn't vertically centered, which bothers me a little bit, but maybe we can work on that later. Now, there's something else annoying here. I'm sure it's hard to see up there. Look how thick the border is in between them. Why is that? We have a 1 pixel border around each one, right? So that means we have a bottom border of a pixel and a top border of a pixel. So both the bottom one of the first item and the top one of the second item are getting slammed into each other, making for a total of 2 pixels. And I don't want that. There are lots of different ways that we could deal with this. One way is to say that on just the very first one, forget the bottom border. Border, just like padding, there's border top, border right, border bottom, border left, or there's border, which will just do them all. But if then I specified a different border bottom, as long as I did it underneath, it'll override it. But I only want it to happen to the first one. So we've used classes, which we know you can use a dot to represent, but there are also these things called pseudo-classes. They work like classes, but you don't actually have to add them to the HTML. They're kind of there automatically. So if I say dot student, we know that will match all of our LIs, right? And if we had more classes we were looking for, we could do that, right? No space, just another class. Pseudo classes are represented by a colon. And there's a pseudo class, first child. Represents an element that is, let's click on this little I here, represents an element that is the first child of some other element. So what this selector will look for is something with a class of student that is the first child of whatever its parent is. So this selector will only grab the first of these. So then we could say border bottom none. Refresh the page. I don't know if you could see it, but now the border is just the way I like it. Let's see. Devin's already on there, so double dose of Devin. So the bottom one no longer has the absence of a bottom border. So what if we just took the bottom border off all of them? Well, then the last one, right? The last one's not going to have a border and we want it to. So what can we do? I don't know if you remember, but I used an image shortcut once for an adjacent sibling. Do you remember that? It was a plus. So dot student plus dot student. We'll look for a student that is immediately preceded by another student. So maybe if it's immediately preceded by another student, we give it no top border. So that should do all of them except the first one. So we can just get rid of the top on all but the first instead of getting rid of the bottom. Let's see what that does. Refresh. First glance, those look right. Let's add yet another. I think that does it. Let's look at our first one. Down here I can see border 1 all the way around. The second one, border none on top, 1 on all the other sides. So over here again I can see all the rules that are applied to this element. And I see that student plus student is applied. If I looked at the first LI, that rule wasn't there. It didn't match. Because it was not a student that was immediately preceded by another student. So that's what the plus is. That's the adjacent child selector. Adjacent sibling, excuse me. They're siblings, they have the same parent. So now my borders are starting to look the way I want them. That makes me happy. Remove and promote. Too many words, man. It's too many words. Let's go ahead and save our progress here. Make it prettier. I don't like to read, man. I like to look at pretty pictures. I just buy picture books. How about we put some icons in there? How's that sound? Let me introduce you to my friend, Font Awesome. Has anyone used Font Awesome before? Cool. fontawesome.io. The iconic font and CSS toolkit. Pre-order and get Font Awesome 5 Pro and all stretch goals for just $40. Yeah, it's not ready yet, but it will be an improvement. So there's a big fat button to download. Let's go ahead and do that. Before you download, check out our latest project, Fort Awesome. No thanks. Just download Font Awesome. There we go. We've downloaded it. Version 4.70. More sets, your icons, fonts too, optimized, hosted faster. If you want to know the answer to that, read the website. Sorry, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck, but it's not worth slowing down class. So what is Font Awesome? It's a bunch of icons inside an actual font. So a nice thing about fonts is they're vector graphics as opposed to raster graphics. Vector graphics are defined by math. They're shapes as opposed to just pixels. So if I increase the size of this thing, zoom way the heck in, these things stay looking super crisp. They don't get jagged. So Font Awesome is just a freely available font that contains a ton of icons. Whole bunch. 675. So when you downloaded it, oops. Probably saw this.